How do you build products that users absolutely love, are hooked on, and are addicted to? In today's episode, we'll be talking about building products from scratch that hook your users and customers using behavioral economics principles. And yes, behavioral science is the secret sauce for building addictive products. I'm joined today by Joseph Sherlock, Principal Behavioral Scientist at Duke University, which is also my alma mater, who is also an incoming assistant professor at King's College London. Impressive. We'll cover the behavioral economics principles and human biases that every single founder needs to be aware of as they're building their prototype, launching a pilot, or launching their MVP. Plus, we'll share some resources that will help you as an early stage founder to make smarter decisions about building your product without having to do a full degree on behavioral economics, because let's face it, who has the time? All the links will be in the description box. Let's dive in. Thanks so much for joining me today, Joey. I had the privilege of taking our course back in 2023 in summer on behavioral economics, and it was a super exciting course. I'm happy to bring you to share your wealth of knowledge with my audience.
Wonderful. Look, thank you for having me. It's so cool to see students who go out and do great things, cool things in the world. So, yeah, thanks for having me on. Excited.
Amazing. I want to start by acknowledging the fact that we are talking to an audience of early stage entrepreneurs or aspiring entrepreneurs. And so, what I want to know is if we're thinking about a behavioral economics, which has gained quite a bit of popularity in the past few years, how important do you think it is for an early stage founder to start thinking about integrating some of the principles of behavioral economics into designing even like a prototype or an MVP, like at an early stage?
Yeah. So look, I think the short answer is it's very important, but I want to sort of counter this up front and say, look, I don't think it's important that people feel daunted or stressed about having to have formal training in behavioral science, behavioral economics to apply some of these ideas. I think sometimes that's a catch that people fall into. But I do think it's really important that people are good, intuitive behavioral scientists. So many things that entrepreneurs or early stage startups are dealing with are behavioral at their core. You know, you're trying to encourage adoption, you're trying to get people to buy something, to change behavior in some direction. You know, these things are behavioral, and they benefit from a strong understanding of behavioral principles and behavioral ideas. And so being good at intuitively applying some of the sort of core concepts from behavioral science and behavioral economics is really, really valuable. And I've worked with several entrepreneurs and startups in that space, and always seen that the ones who kind of can get it a little bit can add a lot of value to their ideas. But of course, like I said at the beginning, it's not necessarily the case that you have to go out and do a PhD or a master's degree to be able to add value at that early stage.
Got it. And just to get like all the core words and principles and terms out of the way. So I hear a lot, it's important to use human-centric design or human-centered design. You can correct me. Or is it a part of behavioral economics? Is it like a branch of behavioral economics, or is it how can we distinguish that? Or is it the same thing?
Yeah, so look, if you speak to different sort of innovators and entrepreneurs and behavioral people in this space, you're going to get different answers on this. But the way I think about it is I like to use sort of applied behavioral science in the broad sense of the word as a vehicle for innovation, you know, like a sort of set of ideas, a set of tools, a set of methodologies that enable me to take a problem and try and solve it and develop creative ways, you know, creative solutions, creative interventions, etc. And so within that, you know, that sort of vehicle for innovation, I think there are different pillars. And I think that, you know, behavioral economics is one of the pillars. And this pillar is around trying to understand um, how humans think and feel and behave, and drawing on the academic literature often around sort of that behavioral sort of style of thinking, understanding that people aren't always rational. We are bounded by our sort of cognitive processing. And so that's sort of one main pillar, so behavioral economics, behavioral science. And then a second pillar here is human-centered design. And so human-centered design brings this element to innovation where we're saying, look, we recognize that we are flawed, that we as innovators don't understand everything. And to solve a problem, we often need to look through the eyes of the people who are experiencing this problem. So we pull out methods around sort of participatory design, or we draw on focus groups. We try and experience things for ourselves. If there's a particular workflow, or a particular issue, you'll get in and you'll experience it. And so human-centered design brings this idea, this approach, but also importantly, a sort of set of tools, methodologies that help you get that help you effectively look through the eyes of the user. And then I would also point to this sort of third pillar, which I would argue is most important, is this point around rigorous evaluation. So we use behavioral thinking and human-centered design in concert to come up with ideas and then solutions, and then it is essential we test them. And so I'd say the third pillar is rigorous evaluation. So to put those together, I would argue that taking a sort of behavioral approach to innovation and using behavioral science as a vehicle for innovation, that we have those three main pillars. One is behavioral economics, one is human-centered design, and one is rigorous evaluation.
Yeah, that's amazing. You've put it very clearly and articulated it. So thanks for that. So, and then by rigorous evaluation, it's in the academic world, it would be the RCTs, right? And then if we're talking about innovators in the space, it would probably be more like the sprints and the testing and prototyping and incremental change. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, so if we zoom in on methods, I think there are, and if you say that what we are trying to do is take a problem and we are trying to go through the whole journey to getting to a point where we have a solution to that problem in the world, and that solution might be a product, or it might be an app, or it might be a policy, or it might be a service, but we're trying to provide a solution to that problem. There are lots of methods that get us all the way through from problem identification through to sort of rollout. And I would say that if you are an entrepreneur and you are looking to solve social problems in the world, that you're an innovator, that you have this sort of toolbox. And in that toolbox are all these different methodologies that you might use. So at the beginning of that journey, you might look to use tools like behavior mapping, where you are trying to take the problem and you're trying to map it, you're trying to break it down and identify where all the pain points and the barriers are and what's stopping people doing the thing that you want to do. You might move into some ideation methodology. So another tool in the toolbox might be, something around brainstorming, using theory of change concepts to try and identify, be specific about your hypothesis and what's going on. You might then sort of prototype, and you might move into some of the human-centered design methodologies around prototyping solutions, drawing it just from scratch, hand drawing it, and then from that taking it into more detailed prototype that starts to do something, and then on and on. You're increasing fidelity over time. And then you might pilot it. And so, another set of skills and tools would be around developing pilots. But then ultimately, I would argue that we need to get to the point where we are testing the solutions that we develop, the services, the policies, the products, the app, whatever it is, that we are testing that ideally in a real world scenario. You can do some lab testing and some sort of A/B style stuff, user research, but really it's important that we get into running an experiment where we give some people the thing and some people not the thing. Ideally, you divide out who gets what using randomization, so that you can be clear that any difference you see between your groups is caused by the product or the app or whatever it is that you built. And then we run those experiments, and then that enables us to really learn. It enables us to learn whether our idea is effective in the world. So I would argue that from that methods perspective, really, think of yourself as an innovator with a toolbox. And part of the skill of being an entrepreneur, being an innovator, is to identify, well, first of all, to have good tools, so develop the methods, develop the skills that are in the toolbox, and then knowing when to bring out the different tools, when to use your spanner or your wrench or your hammer, how to skillfully apply those in context.
That's amazing. So when I'm thinking about designing a product, let's say an app or a digital product of any sorts, I'm thinking about like the assumptions that you make about like what would users want, right? And then you go out and you talk to the users. You talked about the steps, right? It's just behavioral mapping, then ideation methodologies, prototyping, etc. So where does behavioral mapping fit in if you are an entrepreneur who's trying to come up with assumptions and then test those assumptions? Is that the behavioral mapping is a process of is the first step essentially, and how do you integrate that in
Yeah.
initial assumption and theory of change?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think it comes in at the beginning. And I think this point starts with the recognition that if you want to solve a problem, you really need to spend a lot of time understanding the problem. Spend as
Mhm.
much time as possible figuring out what's going wrong. Why are people not doing the thing? What is the context? What has led to this issue in the first place? Is there nuance and really to understand that problem? One of the best ways to get a good grip on it is to map it. To create,
Mhm.
we will often create these behavior maps where we literally map out the different behaviors that people are doing along a journey that leads to the thing we want people to do. Um, and then using that as a visual tool to sort of gather and collect information, and then as we go through, detail out the barriers that are stopping people from doing what we're wanting them to do. Detail out the like, are there useful statistics? Are there useful context points that we can add to the map? And this map, yeah, like you said, it's at the beginning. It's in that sort of problem definition diagnosis phase. Um, and you're sort of using the map to collect lots of the information, the data that you will get from other tools, other methodologies. So, things like interviews, things like focus groups,
Yeah.
doing desk research, literature review, all of this feeds into adding the color to the
Mhm.
to the map.
I love that. So it's the problem definition. I think I skipped a step before making assumptions about what users want. You actually have to start with a problem, which is if you fairly noted that. So yes, so that's the problem definition, and then we come to ideation methodologies. Can you talk a little bit about that and what that entails in terms of developing, let's say, an app or a digital product for an entrepreneur?
Ideation is such a fun bit. And what I would argue, or what I would point out here, is that when we often, in a lot of the stuff you would read about, stories about big entrepreneurs and cool people in the world, that often the stories are told as if they came up with an idea and it was magic. Like they just
Mm.
sparked, oh wow, and they created the iPhone or whatever it is. I would argue that it's actually much less about coming up with ideas and developing the sort of brainstorming part of this is much less about magic. It's actually much more systematic and thoughtful. So I advocate for an approach that sort of leans on developing strong theories of change. So if you are you get to the point in your process where you're saying, look, I have a good understanding of what the problem is, and I can define what the problem is, and then I can say, okay, I think I have a good sense of what prevents people from doing the thing that I want them to do. So I know the key behavior, I know what the barrier is, and so then it's just the ideation part is really just being thoughtful about thinking out what are ways that I can overcome this problem to enable this behavior. And then you can create what we call sort of theory of change statements. So we say we have idea A overcomes barrier B to enable behavior C. And so you can just sort of
Mhm.
lay out that very nice, simple, it turns it into a hypothesis. And you just create that, on a post-it note or on a notepad, or looking at your map or whatever it might be. You just sort of list out lots and lots of these theory of change statements. And I think it's important when working in groups to do that on your own at first. So just to sort of think slowly, write it all down, because we have this problem where, the person who speaks first or the person who speaks loudest influences the group. But so if we encourage groups to sit with that align on what the behavior is, what the problem is, align on what the barriers are, and then think about solutions and ideas on their own first, and then bring them into a sort of a discussion style setting. And often you'll do that with, sticky notes, where you have your different theories of change, your different ideas on sticky notes laid out, and you might map them on a wall where you have axis around how implementable, how feasible something is, and then how
Mhm.
impactful it is maybe on another dimension as well. And you can play with that.
Okay, I have a lot of flashbacks from our course right now.
That's
I
right.
think we did that a lot, quite a bit. And see, I forgot all of that. Amazing. Okay, so we have the problem, then we go through the ideation methodologies, and then we try to basically come up with hypothesis, and then we probably choose the hypothesis that we want to test with our with the users, right? How does the testing happen? Is it again interviews and focus groups, or do we go a step further at this stage?
Yeah, so I think what I would argue is that you develop your ideas. You have the sort of, start with you've done your brainstorming, you've sat in a room, you ordered the pizza, you have like a long list of colorful stickies on the wall.
Mhm.
You've actually gone a step further, and you've done the mapping that you remembered, and you've got some in the top right hand quadrant here that you think are both impactful, but they're also feasible.
Yeah.
And then look, the immediate next step, I think, is just to sit with a pen and paper or a pencil and paper and sketch it. I think that
Mhm.
first move from sticky note to solution, your first prototype, should just be a hand drawn. And look, I'll run workshops with organizations and with people, and I just actively encourage them. Like, everyone can draw, everyone can do stick figures. I'm a terrible drawer, but I can draw.
Same.
Um, and the first step is get get it, visualize it, bring it to life. And then you go through it, and this is sort of the first prototype. So this is,
The
tiptoeing into the
lowest
prototyping.
fidelity possible prototype.
Exactly. Lowest fidelity. Keep it
Uh-huh.
very simple. It needs to take, between 10 seconds and 5 minutes. Very, very quick to make this. And then you're trying to go through a process where you iteratively get feedback on your idea. So it starts with just showing the person next to you, showing your group, whoever it might be, and then building it again, sketching it again, or maybe building up, as you get on and go further and get more feedback. You might sketch out wireframes, or you might build a very simple version of the thing in real life. Again, getting feedback, iteratively increasing fidelity until you get to the point where you have something like a minimum viable product, something that seems to be working in the real world. Not even working, but like you think could work. And at that point, then you start doing some more testing around, does it change behavior? How do people interact with it? Maybe getting some users in the room to get user feedback, interviews, et cetera, et cetera.
So it's an incremental development over time. And so I remember from our course, we had prototyping, then we had pilot, and then I cannot remember if pilot is the same as an MVP or an MVP is one step further from pilot. Can you give us a kind of like an explanation of the difference between prototype slash pilot slash MVP?
Yeah, and again, like, these are terms that I'm sure you'll get different definitions from different people in the
Right.
field. But the way I think about it is sort of roughly you're coming out of prototype with something that is like an MVP, something that you think could stand up in the world and you think is working. Um, and it's at that point that I would say you're moving into a pilot phase. And the pilot
Mhm.
phase is where you kind of try and stand up the MVP, try and get it to a point where it's working. So a nice example from our work, we were developing a municipal food waste collection program with the local city. So this is, in this program, where kind of, as the city collects trash or recycling from outside your house, we developed a program where they would also come and collect food waste. And so
Mhm.
we'd gone through some of these earlier phases around trying to define the problem, trying to, run early prototypes. And it was sort of, learning and iterating as we go. And we got to the point where we were like, okay, we have a version of this that we think could work in the real world. So we set up, an equivalent of an MVP, and we ran a pilot. And that pilot just had 80 households. And so the city just went round for, it was actually for the best part of a year, which was longer than we anticipated. But they just collected food waste from the 80 households. So it's much more manageable. It took, one truck. We were not experimenting at this point. There's no control group. It's just trying to get the service stood up, trying to get it to a point where it's operational. And that's such a useful phase because it enables us to learn so much about how people respond. At what points do they get stuck? What are all the questions that they ask? And that gives us information about what we're not clear enough on. We also had things where the drivers were missing collections because they didn't know that some of the food waste carts were being left in alleys. Some of the houses have alleys between them, and so there was a negotiation around telling people to bring it to the curb on the street versus actually the truck can go down the alley. And this is something we didn't anticipate, and you get that feedback from a pilot that enables you to sort of learn and go on. And we had another one where we were really expecting. We've been told by the organic food processes that contamination, so people putting things that couldn't be broken down, this was terrible and everyone was going to be doing it and we need to be really careful. Turns out, we sort of overcompensated and we drilled people so hard on what they shouldn't put in the food waste that no one did, and so contamination wasn't a problem at all. And we learned that from the pilot, so we sort of then backed off and could be a bit more easy on that point. Anyway, so all to say that piloting phase, I think, is really important. The risk if you don't do an effective pilot, or sometimes multiple pilots, is that you sort of drive on full steam ahead and roll out something that's just not quite right and is broken. And it's much more costly if you've done that with thousands and thousands of users in a big push with funding versus doing it in a small scale in a petri dish where you can innovate, iterate, and go again.
Amazing. Yeah, this is very, very interesting. So I was thinking about, as you were speaking, I was thinking about the different types of low fidelity prototypes that we can have. And you already talked about the sketching, right? That's probably the lowest fidelity type of prototype that you can get. What are some other ones? I know from my experience, I have worked on a prototype. It was called concierge prototype, essentially, where basically it's a functional product, but it was supposed to be a technology, but it doesn't work as technology. We were doing the work in the back end, but people thought it's technology, right? They would submit a form and then we would do the assessment, and send them back the results. They would think it's all technology, but it wasn't. That's what the concierge is. So what are some other types of low fidelity prototypes that you can think about and you can share with us?
Yeah, I love that example. It's exactly what we're trying to get to. So, I mean, look, depending on what you're building, there are different ways you can do this. So, for like digital style tools, often things are built out in tools like NVivo is one. I think I've seen things built out in like Canva, just sort of simply bringing things to life, and creating scenarios where you can sort of skip through. But also, what you described is actually a little bit more creative and organic. You're setting something up that feels to the user like it's a real service, but actually it's not. So if I give the example from our composting program, the food waste program, we did something similar with that one, where sort of before the pilot, so the stage before that, we created prototypes where we told people that the city was exploring doing municipal food waste collection, and would they like to be part of an early phase. And so we sort of onboarded them with our onboarding flow that we were working on and creating. And then we told them, hey, every Thursday morning the city is going to come and pick up your food waste. Here's your bucket and your instructions, and you need to put it out on the curb. And so it felt to the user like it was the city coming and collecting it. Now, of course, it was actually the sort of innovation staff at the city, not the actual food waste staff. But nevertheless, it felt like it was real, and that enabled the staff at the city to run interviews and to sort of ask questions and get a sense from these users what it was like to be part of the program. But in the same way that you were describing, in the back end, it's actually like the innovators doing the work to mimic reality. I had another example here, just to sort of just to give another one. We were working on a an experiment around parking. So we were trying to get people to drive less. And some of the thinking around this is that often when you sign up for a parking pass, you sort of you pay up front for what becomes a sort of all you can eat parking buffet. Like you've already, it's like a gym membership. You've already paid for it. You may as well drive and park. And actually, if you pay for it and then choose not to drive and do something else, you're kind of you're wasting resources. You've like the sunk cost. You've left resources on the table, and so you're kind of an idiot for not maximizing your own utility. Anyway, so this is a frustrating sort of, and I think broken model in the way we deal with parking. So we ran an experiment where we wanted to, first of all, get people to pay daily. And so there's this new program where people were paying daily rather than paying monthly. And so they were, driving in and paying each day, which is great. We wanted to make it more salient. They wanted to make them more aware that the amount, that they were being charged each day. And so thinking of creative ways to sort of make people feel the pain of payment, the awareness of payment more. So we played with ideas like, could we make people pay in cash? Could we make them get out of their car and drop coins in a bucket? Could we, give them a receipt, that tells them how much they were paying? And of course, lots of these ideas got pushed down. But what stuck was to create a so imagine you get an Uber ride or a Lyft ride, and at the end of that ride, you receive an automated email from Uber saying you just paid, $11.55. This was the route you did. This was the date. This was the name of your driver, etc. We wanted to create something similar to that, but for parking. So drive up to the parking deck, you swipe your pass to get in. It charges them in the background. We wanted to make them more aware that they were being charged, and so we then send them a parking receipt, like the Uber email that goes to the email address. And so we created this idea, and of course, it's quite a lot of technology to set up that that service. The idea that we could automate who's coming in, mail merge the email and send it through. So we set up a system where we would just download at the end of each day the people who had swiped in into a spreadsheet, and then we had a research assistant who would create the emails, mail merge in manually who was receiving them, and then send out. And so we were able to run an experiment where people felt like they were receiving this parking receipt. In reality, it was very manual on the back end.
Yeah, this is great because it's all shows like creative ways you can test the product without actually building out the technology. But it's still like the service works. It still does the job as if technology would, right? But there is no technology, there is no algorithm or anything to it. It's just the person doing it. I think it's a great example. Thanks for sharing that. Um, I know that okay, so there are a lot of products now, applications, apps specifically, that are using behavioral science principles. And I mean, like they get you hooked, some of them. Can you think about some of the examples of for you, like what are some of the best examples of apps that really use the principles of behavioral economics or behavioral science in general, that stand out to you?
Yeah. Well, look, I can think of lots that get me in a way that I'm not happy about. Lots of the like attention grabbing ones that I won't go through. But I'll tell you about one that I really like. So I'm a big fan of Audible.
Hmm.
Um, I am not a great, despite being an academic, I'm not a great reader, and so I consume a lot of
Really?
books. Yeah, I don't like. I'm slow and clunky, and it's not my favorite thing, especially if I spent all day reading things for work. The idea of like reading in my evenings is not what I want to do. So I'm a big Audible fan. I consume a lot of books each year, but I do it through Audible. And I find some of the things they've done really, really useful. So the first one is actually, some of the ideas we're talking about around parking, around sunk costs. So
Mhm.
I have a subscription to Audible, so each month I get charged and I get credits, and I've already paid for those, so spending them on books then feels like free money. It doesn't feel like I'm spending my own money anymore. It feels like I'm spending these free credits that Audible has given me.
Yeah.
How kind of them. And then once I've got these credits, I feel like I need to spend them. Like I've paid for these, and so I may as well spend them. And then once I've spent them on books, I feel like, well, I bought this book. I need to listen to it. Otherwise, I'm wasting my money, wasting my credits. And so it sets up this.
Loss aversion.
Yeah, exactly. It
Yeah.
sets up
See,
this
I
really.
remember.
You got it. Sets up this virtuous cycle where like I have sunk my resources into this product and service, and then I may as well use it. Like if I don't use it, I'm an idiot. And so that feels like a virtuous way rather than the parking deck, which feels kind of
Mm.
problematic. But there's more that Audible does as well. I mean, of course, the big one is they make it really easy. If the number one
Mhm.
rule in behavioral science is make it easy, they are literally taking away the friction of reading. They
Right.
are reading to me,
Yeah.
which makes it easy. And then here's this last one. I think. I've been an Audible account for a long time. I have a membership that has lots of books in it, and I sometimes am frustrated that I can't. If those books were in an actual library, they would be physical and tangible, and I could hand them out to my friends and pass them around and give recommendations. Of course, because it's all digital, you can't.
Mhm.
But Audible are very sort of liberal with the way they let people log in. So I give people my login. Maybe I shouldn't say that out loud on a podcast.
Yeah,
Audible might not be
probably
happy
not. They're probably gonna change it right after they hear this
Right, yeah,
podcast.
because they're definitely listening to what I have to say.
Absolutely. And
Um,
my podcast.
but yeah, I feel like there's a really nice social element where I am like
Mhm.
sharing the sort of book consumption experience with my friends and family, which gives me, more motivation to do it and discussion and yeah, all the rest of it.
Mhm. Is it safe to say that probably all the apps that are good nowadays and that are out there, they probably use some form of they probably have a behavioral science department sitting there and just like thinking about the users and how to get them hooked.
Yeah, I would be surprised if some of the big products, apps, whatever it might be, startup ideas that have a behavioral, they're trying to change people's behavior. If that is at their core, they're thinking about this stuff. It's
Mhm.
increasingly common for these organizations to have in-house behavioral science teams or a chief behavioral officer is an
Mhm.
increasingly common thing. And if they don't have those in-house, then it's very common that they are pulling from, working with some of the consulting organizations in this space or working with academics in this space. And I would say like if they're not doing it, they're either missing a trick or they're doing it and not realizing they're doing it, and maybe not,
Mhm.
maybe doing it slightly suboptimal.
Mhm. Mhm. So I know that there are a lot of behavioral science principles, and it's just so much like a lot of biases to think about like loss aversion, social proof, like status quo, etc. It's really hard especially for a founder to think about all of that, right? If you and obviously we can't cover it within this short episode, but if you were to think about like some of the essentials that every founder needs to think about, what would that be?
Yeah, you're right. There's a lot out there. There's a lot to learn. But I think if you're going to distill some of these rules into some rules of thumb, at least, I think the first one is if you want someone to do something, you need to make it easy. So you need to
Mhm.
think about friction. You need to think about the what you are asking someone to process. You need to think about if there has to be friction, where is that, and at what point in the process are you putting it? And ultimately thinking about how you can streamline everything to reduce the amount that people process. Really, humans we are limited and flawed in the amount that we can process. We have sort of evolved brains that are incredible, don't get me wrong, but they're also not suited for the sort of boundless information and opportunities that we have in today's complicated, increasingly digital world. And so we just can't keep up, and as a result, we don't process everything. We just process what we feel we need to. And so you want someone to
Mhm.
do something, make it easy, make it simple. The next one is humans are, intrinsically social. we are, again, we've evolved to be social animals. We work in groups, and so we are influenced by those around us. We are influenced by what we think other people like us, or that we aspire to be like. We're influenced by what they think we should do. We're influenced by what they actually do. We're influenced by what they are increasingly doing if there's a change in the trend. And so it's important that entrepreneurs recognize that humans don't, we don't exist in a vacuum. We're very social animals, and you can be sort of systematic and thoughtful about that. And then maybe another one. You actually meant this brought this one up earlier, Lucy. That this point around loss aversion. People, we systematically don't like loss.
Mm.
Um, we are much more motivated to avoid loss than to
Mm.
receive the equivalent gain. And so that's something for people to be thoughtful about as well.
Mm. Amazing. Thank you so much. I'm going to ask last question, which is if you were to point entrepreneurs and early stage founders to any resources that are out there, or books, or maybe easy, consumable, easy, timely, and easy consumable material, what would that be? And then we will obviously link it in the inner description as well.
Yeah, I would say come and do a summer school with me.
Yay! I definitely highly recommend that. That's for sure. It's a
Yeah,
short, it's 10 lessons, right?
yeah, we have there's a couple that I'm working on. One with the with Duke University that is about about that. And I think there'll be one in June this year. And then there is also I'm moving across to King's College London soon, and there's some sort of like short-term executive courses there as well. But beyond that, if that's not appealing to you, look, there are loads of great podcasts out there. I really like Freakonomics, but there are so many
Yeah.
that you could get stuck into. Hidden Brain, I forget all the names, but yeah, Google behavioral science podcasts. There's loads. And then look, I also would encourage you to get through books. Use Audible if you need to. Danny Kahneman, Richard Thaler. Think about some of the. Katie Milkman is really great in this space. Again, there's loads out there.
Mhm.
Get stuck in. And then look, there are some conferences if you're so inclined. Depending on your specific bend, there's usually a conference for it. But some of the bigger conferences around, behavioral science and policy,
Mhm.
BSPA, or if you're kind of more nerdy, there's the SJDM, Society Judgment Decision Making, is a bit more academic. But anyway, there's Google your specific niche. There's almost definitely a conference for you out there as well.
And I remember you shared a very interesting resource that I looked through, and I remember I was reading it at some point. It was a kind of a manual, very easy read. I will link it in the description, but I cannot remember for the love of it what the
Oh,
name of it was. It
there's
was
a few
manual.
frameworks. One is East, which might be what you're thinking of.
I probably, yeah.
And there's another one, ComB. East is from the Behavioral Insights team. ComB is from University College London. Susan Mickey. So yeah, there's a couple of frameworks like that which are really useful. It's a really good point.
Yeah, I will definitely add those into the description. And with that, thank you so much, Joseph. And actually, Joey, you said to call you Joey, so not Professor, not Joseph, Joey. Thank you for joining me. It was a great discussion. I learned a lot and I refreshed a lot of things that I forgot. So I appreciate it.
Thank you, and it's so great to see you taking off doing such cool stuff. Yeah, if your listeners want to reach out and chat, I'd be happy to do so. Thank you for having me. Thank you for your time.
Thanks a lot.